Good afternoon, YouTube. I will be making at least a two-part series of videos about this video I found on the Global News YouTube channel about Western alienation. I will be pausing the video in between just to be talking about certain points that they bring up during this presentation. So thank you for watching and please enjoy.
Welcome to our special presentation on Western alienation here on Global News.
Now, over the next half hour, we're going to look at the issues that have led to where we are today, the players involved, and the way forward.
But to go forward, we should look to the past and get an idea of the representation Alberta and Saskatchewan have sent to Ottawa since joining Confederation.
Now, over the course of the first 50 years in Canada for the two provinces, results were mixed, but a turning point came in 1958. That was when John Diefenbaker's Progressive Conservatives took all but one seat in the two provinces. It was a victory built largely on a road to resources policy that stoked northern and western interests. Since that election, Conservative parties have dominated, winning almost 95% of the seats contested between the two provinces. And of course, in 2019, not one seat went to the Liberals, and just one to a party other than the Conservatives. But even since 1958, there's been a sense of constant malaise and sometimes vigorous protests when it comes to how the West has viewed the Federation.
Joel Sednick spoke with a political scientist to learn more about the ins and outs of the movement.
The idea of Western alienation has flared up at different points during our history. What makes this flare-up different than in the past?
I think what's really different about this flare-up is that it coincides with this existential moment for the oil industry and the oil and gas industry here in Alberta that is facing an extraordinarily uncertain future because of concerns about climate change. And that means that we have both the traditional Western alienation layered on with fear about economic dislocation and change to the source of prosperity for the province.
The goal of political movements, I would assume, would be to impact change. And when we look back on this issue both historically and I guess now currently, can we point to anything that tells us, okay, this is going to make a difference either in legislation or how we are heard as a province in Ottawa?
One of the ways that Western alienation has had an enormous effect on Canadian politics has been as a driver of change in the party system. And so we've seen it both the sort of left populists, the progressives, the CCF, which then become the NDP, come out of the West, and they change Canadian politics in all kinds of ways. By the same token, we can think back to the Reform Party that broke apart the Progressive Conservative Party's coalition and changed the Canadian party system really profoundly. So there are certainly policy dimensions that come with that, but the fundamental driver is changing the shape of political competition. And, when we look across the history of Canada, really that has been the biggest impact, in my view, of these periodic uprisings of Western alienation.
Indigenous rights, First Nations rights, play a role in here, and I feel like we don't often hear a lot about that. How would you say Indigenous rights play a role in this issue?
Well, I think, if we look at the Western separatism movement specifically, it really is a movement led by and for the most part followed by white men. There is very little consideration of...
Okay. I want to pause it there because I'm sure many of my viewers will have picked up on something like that. I'm so tired of hearing this so-called white men, white supremacy nonsense that they keep coming out with. And to those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, let me tell you something about what we learn in university. There is a substantial bias against, let's call it, white people in Canada, especially white men. What they're doing is they're trying to do a little bit like psychological re-education, where they try to make people bias against themselves or train them to be against themselves, more or less, against the... It's complex to explain, but you see the evidence right there. The issue isn't actually Indigenous being ignored at all. People that live in this province, we are very much aware and very much careful about respecting Indigenous rights. And that's not the issue at all. The issue is, well, business, which affects all of us. Indigenous people want to see the pipeline built just as much as any other Albertan. Because, as I see it, several Indigenous groups have already come forward in support of the pipeline, and there's been a great deal of input from Indigenous peoples all over the province and even in BC. But again, they convolute the message to try to make it appear as a racism statement and not about the prosperity of business. I'm so tired of hearing that narrative, and many of you know what it is. It's training to be racist against themselves, essentially. Racist against the white Canadian man narrative. I'm so tired of hearing it. Who decided that Canada's white males were the enemy of Canada? Because as far as I'm hearing in the news, in school, and so on, as soon as they bring up the Indigenous narrative, they go right to that statement. Canadian white men are the source of the... You know what? The problem is, in this country, we are deeply saddened because Indigenous peoples, or the suffering of Indigenous peoples, is a pretense to attack certain groups in this country. And when I look at the working class in this province that lost their jobs because of Trudeau and the oil sands, Trudeau preventing the oil sands from functioning with all his crazy legislation and nonsense going on, the C-69, it makes me so angry that nobody points out Indigenous peoples aren't actually being wronged in this scenario that they explain. No. Indigenous peoples, or the sufferings of Indigenous peoples, are used as a pretense to attack Canadian groups, let's call it. I specifically Canadian white men, and I'm so tired of it. Men generally, you never hear them talk about Canadian white women, okay? The idea that sexism is at the forefront of politics these days makes me sick to my stomach, because we don't have an issue with sexism. It's nothing to do with being a male or being a woman or transgender or anything like that. It's to do with the fact that we don't have jobs. We're out of work, and that's the only motivation. We could care less about all the other issues that these so-called media clowns keep spinning to try to create division between us. That's why Canada has no national identity. They rather be divided and divide us and create animosity between the provinces. That's why BC and Alberta, our relationship is deeply strained. You know, I'm not talking about all of British Columbia. I'm talking about like the cities in British Columbia, like Vancouver and so on and so forth. You talk about the people that voted with the NDP, that voted with Trudeau. These people, you know, I don't understand what kind of education they possess, because anybody that votes with him, that you cannot say you're pro-business if you vote for Trudeau. Anybody in the business community, especially the energy sector, will tell you that he's made things deeply twisted, if you will. If you're a businessman or a businesswoman, you set down your roots in this country. You've built up your company from nothing. Say it took you 25 years, 20 years, it doesn't matter, hypothetically speaking. And then Trudeau comes along and introduce chaos, let's say. Introduce a lot of bureaucracy, more and more government jobs, more government legislation, and seeks to snuff you out, which will happen eventually. The taxation, all this other nonsense, the extra rules, all of this affects how you conduct your business confidence in this country, how you spend your dollars, and whether or not you can thrive and stay here. You come to a certain point, and I've seen it many times in the city of Calgary, that businesses move away. Businesses will go to a climate that's favorable, like the US at this moment. So many companies have relocated from Alberta to Texas to wherever. But they don't stay. And why should they stay? Here, having business is so uncertain, so much uncertainty. Nothing scares business people more. And without them, we don't have capital nor the same amount of taxes. The great Stephen Harper once said, even if you raise taxes, you still won't collect the same taxes. Companies will become clever. They'll figure out a way that they don't have to pay it. So you raised it for nothing because you raise the taxes, but you collect fewer taxes. It's nobody understands the efficiency required to run a business. If you run a business, you run it efficiently, you run it better than your competitors, and you have to do what you must to thrive, survive, to grow, to evolve with the times. And if you fail, you are taken out by another company, or you go bankrupt, and the pieces of your company will be bought off by other people. Your loss becomes someone else's gain. And it is like that. Any serious business conducts itself in a manner that is highly efficient and selling, and its bottom line is the key, because if it doesn't, they don't survive. Trump understands that. Trump understands that creating jobs, not government jobs like what Rachel Notley does or Trudeau does, or even Nenshi. These people concentrate on government jobs. Government jobs don't count for anything. The taxpayer pays for those jobs. They don't bring money into the economy. Entrepreneurs and business people make jobs. These massive companies can benefit us in ways we don't even comprehend. The benefits are endless. If an oil company is permitted to function normally and to perform to its max potential, there is no need for Canada to be in a recession. At all. Zero. We could be performing the same as the Americans, or even better, if allowed to conduct our affairs the proper way. So again, I reiterate this message so that the rest of Canada or whoever is listening can understand and hear. Indigenous peoples, the idea of Indigenous wronging and so on is true, but that's being used as an excuse to attack certain people that create division. It's a pretense to be racist on the side of the media against white men, specifically Canadian white men. They're not to blame. These people don't have any trouble with Indigenous peoples. We respect the rights of these people. It's nothing to do with anything. The media is just spinning that nonsense. It creates division. It doesn't do anybody any good. We're doing our best to work together at this moment, but Trudeau is he's adamant about creating division between groups so that he can do as he pleases. Nothing to do with helping Indigenous communities. Nothing. It's pointless. The Indigenous would benefit a great deal from the pipeline being built and actually being put, the economy being put in order. Everybody would benefit. That's the key. It's not partisan. It's not racism. It's a simple need to create jobs that have been lost and nothing more than that. Those of you who understand Wexit knows that this statement that Global News made, this interviewer and the professor, they're trying to make it about something else than what it is. If they lose their jobs, they'll be desperate too. I tell you that. People never understand. I've seen so many people suffering because of Trudeau's new laws that prevent us from conducting our way of life. And I'm tired of hearing that it's about the Indigenous, racism against the Indigenous. It's not. Canada is a highly multicultural society, a very unique platform. We wish to conduct our affairs in peace and harmony with our fellow men and women. It doesn't matter what else is there to talk about. They just tell half-truths so that they can confuse the public. It's, to me, I see that narrative and I just shudder because that narrative had no place in politics. So to those of you who are watching, I tell you this: if Alberta and Saskatchewan want to separate, I'm with them. Because as long as Trudeau is elected, then there cannot be a unified Canada. And all of you know it. I feel very strongly that the wind hasn't been favorable to us in the past because we've had the wrong leadership on our side. Many of you who have watched this channel know that in the past there have been people that have been aiming to grab power just to use Wexit as a tool to get to the top. But there needs to be serious discussion about not even the possibility of separating, but actual discussions on how it can be achieved, and then talks about talks with Trump or talks with the rest of Canada, but get something done. Jason Kenney, I'm talking to you. Because it's nice that you can discuss things, but in the meantime, people are still out of work, people don't have jobs, people are suffering greatly, and for no other reason than some insane nonsense from the PM that he decided, okay, we're going to block Alberta from getting their oil out. By hook or by crook, we will block them. Trudeau doesn't care about Alberta. It's well documented that he hates Alberta from all the way back to his high school days. The issue isn't Trudeau. The issue is Trudeau's policies. If there were anybody that said that Trudeau got elected on merit, on the quality of his workmanship, I doubt anybody in Canada would say that that man has any good workmanship or decent policy or done anything to benefit Canada whatsoever since he took power. This country has suffered so long as he's been in power. But I tell you, it's a tragedy because it's not necessary. And people like this who talk about the so-called white men that are racist against the Indigenous, I don't buy it for a second. This is only about creating jobs, bringing back jobs that Trudeau has taken away from us, and nothing more. The livelihood of people is to be respected. It's nothing to do with racism or any other motivation. It is simply to survive or to thrive, to provide for your family, to provide for the needs, And when those needs are met, then you can worry about politics. When your belly is empty and you don't have heat for your house and all kind of necessary human life for human dignity, then it becomes about more than just politics. It becomes about survival. People become angry. People become desperate. The crime is thriving, going through the roof. They're so... It's an inhumane way to live, especially in this country. With the modernization that we enjoy, the democracy, it should never come to pass like this. I will be making subsequent videos about these topics because this video is about 22 minutes long. This current recording is about 20 minutes already. So I thank you for your time and attention. I'll be releasing another part 2 of this interview. Thank you for your time and attention.